comparison, the analogous comparison from another part of the world doesn't translate very well. And I would suggest that perhaps within our states, which are all very different, there are plenty of examples of things that have moved. And so the in-state comparison across cities becomes especially important to make the political economy argument for why something needs to move. And I think we could use that a little bit more. There are some gaps in the reports that I would just like to highlight. One is, I think Nick, Anil, Markandya, certainly Meenu in my discussions with her, we've talked a lot about this question of land. It's easy to talk about land reform and land governance and so on. The question really is, why is there this much attention to land? Now, it may seem obvious, there's obviously a lot of money to be made off of land. The question is why? And are there other things we could look at to land to move this debate along? So, besides talking about the real estate impact and so on, is there a way in which, for example, land productivity measures could be built into these studies? Is there a way in which we could think about fiscal transfers or generation of assets or ties to capital markets, which come with clear markers about whether one is using land in ways that are more productive? And I put that on the table because a lot of agricultural land gets flipped. And this is because, of course, we know that agricultural productivity rates in India are not the highest. So the question is, there is something going on here between urban land and agricultural land. There's a relationship here between industrial land use and agricultural land. And I think this is a big question about how fast our cities go, whether we think of this as sprawl or we think of this as productive growth. The other piece that is missing, and I think could be a very nice second phase of study, is if we look at industrial sectors and we look at their differential impact in cities, we see that some of this spatialization can be explained. Pune, Surat, Bhopal, Bangalore have very different industries. They have very, very different industries. They have very different industry compositions. The kind of agglomeration patterns associated with those industries is quite different. You can all think of them, and we can think about how they agglomerate and whether in fact they do cluster or not. I think this assumption that industries cluster and they cluster in a particular way is a nice provocation raised by these reports. I think we can take that further. I think it's a very useful one because it will tie us into resource networks as well as mobility questions. There's a whole pollution question we can raise, and I think the health data that is brought out by the costing study is incredibly important. It might tie in to the full costing question on the industrial side as well. Maybe that is work that we could see go forward. There's a whole demand question I won't get into, which is not just how households use resources, but how do firms use resources and grow. A lot of our spatial planning, let me give you an example also from Bangalore. At one point, most of you know that Pune was one of the largest, fastest growing SME clusters in Asia. And over a period of time, Pune, which was part of Bangalore, became really kind of ossified, became very constrained because the model of industrial growth there was really spatialized and kind of walled off. So you can imagine after a period of time when firms are thinking of warehousing, storage, transportation, growth, multiple firms being bought out, a little block of land is not going to help you. So the government of Karnataka responded by creating a different zone and trying to build out Nelamangala. But if you are in Pune and you eventually have kind of breached your walls, if you like, you're not just going to automatically move over to Pune, to Nelamangala, right? From Pune to Nelamangala. So this SME cluster business going on, this kind of assumption that economic growth can be spatialized in a distinct way, I think is something for us to push a little bit further. There are multiple audiences for this report. If I would say anything, that the reports are very strong. The papers are extraordinarily strong. And this version that you're seeing, which doesn't reflect full studies in all their richness, really points out to me how important it is going to be going forward to do the connections that those on the pseudo-dais have pointed out, right? Which is that there are many audiences for these two papers, and it is for us collectively to strategize who those are and what instruments will resonate with them and which ones won't. A big piece missing, and I would really like to see a way for us, all of us, to contribute to this, is the role of the private sector. Not only does the NCE bring the strengths of the private sector in its consortium framework, the industry sectors in these 4 cities are very powerful. And there's an opportunity to, through a kind of a sector consortia idea, to take the quite far-reaching implications of these studies further. These could be in real estate, they could be in automotive, they could be in energy suppliers, they could be internet or mobile network telecoms providers. But I think we're going to have to strategize this a little bit more. And there's great power to be had to look at industry consortia and how we might think about these. So let me end by simply saying that what is really quite remarkable about the reports is that they have synthesized something we all know quite instinctively, but have struggled to pull together. And I think it's a kind of a testament to the group that the NCE, ICRIER, WRI have brought together, that this group of very good researchers, some of whom I know very well, have managed to put across a set of assumptions about jobs, infrastructure, transport, water, energy use in a way that is quite reminiscent of the old style of urban historicism that we know exists. What we don't know is how to accommodate the very fast, dynamic view of the technological change that is underpinning a lot of this growth, and to make sense of the multiple relationships between industrial development and urbanization that is embedded in these 4 cities. I think just laying that out further in a next phase would already go a very, very long way in cross-country comparisons. So I really want to thank you for not only inviting many of us here to comment, but I think you've set the bar very high with these reports, and I think there's a lot to be done, and there's us and OP and dinner. All right, thank you.
Well, first, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come here and listen to all this. It's normal to expect that a discussant would talk about the report that's been presented. Unlike Smita, I didn't have the benefit of looking at the interim version, so I don't think I would be in a position to comment on the report. Very brief comments, but then I want to get on to something else. On the report itself, I think this whole idea of using night lights as a source of data for economic activity is fascinating to me. How it pans out and all that, I really won't be able to say very much, but the idea is fascinating. I've not seen this in any other study, but to me it's great. A little bit of comment on transport that you've talked about. What I liked was you've not used the conversation around congestion. I've seen far too much being talked about congestion. You've talked about connectivity. You've talked about access. I think that's where the conversation really needs to go. Our problem is not congestion. Our problem is access. And if access improves and you can get to a place in less time, whether it's congested or not congested, how does it matter? So issue is not congestion. And the analogy I try to give, I try to argue that if you are suffering from an infection and you have fever, the remedy is not crocin. The remedy is an antibiotic. But if you go to a bad doctor, he'll give you crocin and keep giving you crocin to get the fever down, but your infection hasn't gone. And that's what we've been doing in India on congestion. You have congestion, build more roads, keep building more roads. And I've seen this discussion happening at the highest levels in government. The remedy to our transport problems is widen roads, whereas everybody around the world is talking about that's not the way to do it. Anyway, let me leave it at that. As far as the report is concerned, I think two points that I liked a lot. What worries me on many conversations like this, and I've attended many of them, is the municipal commissioner in Guwahati, or is the municipal councillor in Guwahati aware of all this? Is he able to understand this? Is he able to action all this into doing things the right way? And the answers I keep getting, and when I go to some of these cities and talk at that level, I find totally clueless about all this. To my mind, what we need to do first is to be able to get even 1/10 of what we are talking here into what is happening in the cities and get them to understand what's the right thing to do. And what that needs is what Dr. Ahluwalia said, massive capacity building. It's a massive capacity building effort that we need in the country, and capacity building, to my mind, is not a whole range of training programs being conducted in various parts of the country. No, capacity building goes way, way, way beyond above just training programs being conducted, and that too low-cost training programs being conducted. It must encompass education. Is our educational system throwing up the number of planners that this country will need? Is our planning curriculum in the schools of planning up to date? Is there enough research happening in the country which is context specific? Are we just picking up stuff from what's happening elsewhere and trying to use those models for doing the things that should be done here? And the point that came up repeatedly about data, to my mind, capacity building program must include a mechanism for collecting, storing, analyzing, and disseminating data. So these are some of the things, and the reason I'm saying this here is I think we have in this audience a lot of people who will be able to influence this thing at the places where that influence is needed. I think on the panel we have people like Dr. Kedwai and Dr. Stern and Dr. Ahluwalia, whose what they say makes a world of difference in policies. And that's why I thought it's a good opportunity to say it. I was hoping Neeraj would still be here, but he's not. But to my mind, this is what I think is, I feel we listen to all these things, but there's a huge gap between the conversations going on here and the actions going on in the field. And unless we are able to do something to bridge that gap, we'll be talking here, but exactly the opposite may keep happening there. I really don't want to say very much more, but I think it's fantastic that you've come up with this report. I expect to read it. As you said, I spend the rest of the evening reading this report, but thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, OP, and thank you very much, Smita, for your kind comments. Rajat, we have some time to open up, right?
Yes, we have. We can take about.
So we'd like to open up. We would love to hear your comments about the report, or also more of what OP and Ishwar was talking about. How do we use this to influence what do we do next? Please, sir.
Yeah, I'm Kirit Parikh. Some of you may not know it, but I was involved in the planning of the Navi Mumbai project in the 70s. We had, in the planning team, we were about 8 of us, which included Charles Korea, Sirish Patel, M.S. Kore, who is the director of Tata Institute of Social Science Research, Vijay Tendulkar, the playwright, and so on. So it was really a very intense discussion from a very broad multidisciplinary perspective. And the number of issues that came up is really, the most important thing is, yes, this is your vision, but you must recognize that a city evolves, it needs change, it grows. And how do you design a strategy which tells you to, how do you grow from here to there, and have policies which facilitate